all for coming. We will be recording, so thanks for remembering to do that. Um, and we also just wanted to give everybody a reminder about access to the presentation today. So if you would like live captions, you can enable them. We can go to the next slide, Joanne. Thanks. By selecting the caret above the live transcript along the bottom of your Zoom screen near the mute and the video icons. You may need to select more if you don't see the live transcript. But if you then you can select show subtitle if you want the captions along the bottom, and that's outlined as you can see in this red box. But if you find those distracting, you can stop them and select view full transcript instead. And that will just display this live transcript along the right. And so if you're unable to locate that, just let us know in the chat and we can help you with that. You can DM, direct message Supriya as well. So CEILS team wants to first acknowledge our presence on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples. And we have a link we'll put in the chat to learn more about their history and the history of this territory, and also a link to learn more about the history of those lands that are inhabited by non-Indigenous people throughout the country. So feel free to explore that. And of course, I want to introduce myself. I'm Rachel Kennison. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm the director for CEILS, the Center for Education, Innovation, and Learning in the Sciences. We are a STEM center for teaching and learning at UCLA. We serve all the life and physical science faculty. We have an amazing team of folks with diverse expertise, and I have to give a huge shout out to them, especially around creating this workshop today, or event today. I don't want to call it a workshop, but I have huge gratitude for them. They are amazing in the way they were able to be agile in this moment and create the slides for this and the materials, put it together with thoughtfulness. It takes a lot of expertise and dedication and passion for what they're doing and their work and being able to serve you. So huge shout out to my team and much gratitude and appreciation. I also just want to thank our campus partners who've been very much involved with this event, as well as last week's forum, the Center for the Advancement of Teaching, Information Technology Services, the LMS Transformation Team, as well as Online Teaching and Learning, have folks here ready to answer your questions and be supportive in all the ways that they can to help you with your teaching. Okay, so I just want to remind everybody not to forget to breathe. This is definitely, breathing is something we underestimate as important, and we need to remember to do it. So let's just take 10 seconds right now for everybody to just take a deep inhale and then a deep exhale and let it all out. And I recommend doing this as often as you possibly can, just as a reminder that, this is stressful and we need to find a way to cope with that stress. And breathing is an important way to do that. Being mindful of that can really help. Okay, so our goals for today are really to provide you with a space to talk and express your concerns, your questions, also to brainstorm with each other, to share information and ideas. You're going to hear from some UCLA students and grad students about their experience and how they're reacting to this transition. We'll discuss options for instructors and students related to returning to in-person teaching and learning. We'll talk about how we can support you in developing a clear plan of action and a communication strategy to move forward with your course and support your students. And then we'll also, hopefully in the end, give you some time to talk with each other in a breakout room about your plan. And so our goal here is to really have as much discussion as possible to answer your questions. We may or may not get to the breakout room, but we're going to have a collaborative document so that you can share your information with each other and have an opportunity to collaborate once this event is over. All right. So there are lots of different perspectives and reactions and feelings about returning to in-person, and they span the gamut. And not, everyone has their own experience with this, and so there are going to be folks, students, faculty, everybody who's going to be very excited about the return to in-person, and there are also going to be folks who are feeling like, why are we doing this, and why are we doing this now? And so this is just to kind of remind ourselves that there's no right or wrong here, that really we want to focus on our own individual decisions and how they can best support our teaching and also our students and our TAs. And so I'll give you just a second to read through these. I'm not going to go through all the different bullets here, but I'm sure even within ourselves sometimes we can have conflicting feelings, right? So this is just to remind ourselves of how to have some empathy for our own experience as well as the experience of others. And so with that, I'd like to go to our students and to our grad students here that are going to share some of their reactions so that we get a sense of where they're coming from. So we have Sarah Bagia, who's a public health grad student, who will talk with us about her experience. And if each of you could just wave when I say your name, that would be great. We have Marissa Chu, who is an undergrad learning assistant in integrative biology and physiology. Thank you, Marissa, for being here. We have Kaylee Bear, and she is also an undergrad LA in material science and engineering. And then we have Ava. Is it Ava or Eva? I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
Eva, no problem.
Eva. Okay, thanks. Dinesh, and she is in psychobiology. So I thought we'd ask each of you to just spend a couple of minutes talking about, sharing a bit about how you're feeling right now about the return to in-person learning and any concerns you have or your that your peers are having about this transition. Okay, so why don't we start with Ava? Eva? Sorry.
Eva, no problem.
Eva. Yeah, you just told me that.
Yes, no problem. Hello, everyone. My name is Eva, and as she said, I'm a second-year student. I think my biggest concern is as a second year, I personally have never taken an in-person class at UCLA before. Even last quarter, all my classes were online, so I've never really had the experience of being in a large lecture hall, or I never had the opportunity to get used to that learning style, something I had always been afraid of throughout high school. So my biggest thing would be to ensure that we are getting the opportunities to get used to that type of learning, because obviously you might think I've been at UCLA for 2 years. Of course, I know how to do this, but I don't personally think that I'm equipped to start in a lecture hall.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Eva. Okay, let's go to Kailey next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking time to come chat with us today. So I'm coming from the perspective of somebody whose major was completely in person last quarter. So I can attest to what it's like to be a student in the in-person experience during COVID. My biggest observation was the sheer amount of students that came to school sick. I would say every day in my class, there was at least one sick person. And that meant that all of us got sick at one point throughout the quarter, whether it be COVID or something else. But it was not well managed because the engineering courses told us we had to maintain 85% in-person attendance throughout the quarter to pass the class, which resulted in everyone coming to school sick and the faculty getting sick too. So that was a really big stressor on us and the professors as well, because there was no online options made available for us or accommodations if we wanted to be a virtual student. And I just wanted to encourage you to offer online options and not encouraging, you have to be here in person, just because like I have chronic health conditions that made me feel really nervous about contracting COVID. And so it was, there's a lot of like anxiety about going into class, knowing like, is this going to be the day I get COVID from my other students? Because we're not filling out the survey, they're not checking the survey, and people are contagious around me. So I think that just making sure that like in person shouldn't be forced upon students who aren't feeling well.
Great. Thank you so much, Kaylee. And we are definitely going to address those questions about absences policies and different options that faculty can have to address some of those concerns. So I really appreciate that. Okay, Marissa, are you available to chat with us?
Yeah, so sorry about the noise. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. I also wanted to thank you all for taking the time to listen to our point of views and our perspectives. It feels great to have a staff that's willing to hear us out. Just like Kaylee was talking about, I also have a very similar fear of all of my friends that are immunocompromised. I have personally experienced it where UCLA's COVID testing protocols, as well as wearing masks, getting tested frequently, as well as being boosted, still has shown me that it's still possible to spread. I have a bunch of girls that I play softball with who have been testing twice a week, and it still kind of got under the radar. And it ended up exposing a bunch of people as well because we weren't aware. Because it's with the newer variants, the symptoms are very minimal, so to speak, for some. So it's hard to see right away. And I also wanted to bring to the attention of some of our international students and out-of-state students who were given about a week to kind of figure it out and get here. And I have a roommate who has friends that are in China and Taiwan that are currently unable to find any flights outside of their country, and their professors aren't being accommodating and offering the remote options. So I know that in previous quarters, a lot of my professors weren't exactly the most accommodating for the transition of students going from remote learning to, in person to remote learning, which put a lot of pressure on the students to be present and do the best that they could with very little time to learn that or adjust to the learning curve. And then now I'm also seeing that same fear of, will professors still try to be accommodating when we go from remote learning to in person? Because I know exams got a lot harder for a lot of my courses because it was online and they wanted to protect the academic integrity, which I totally understand. But at the same time, it also punishes other students who do uphold that integrity, and it puts a lot of additional stress. And I don't believe that having the stress about their grades and everything should be prioritized over our mental well-being and our physical health as well.
Really well said, Marissa. Thank you for sharing that and really bringing up the point about mental health and the prioritization of that, and also thinking about different students have such different circumstances, right, that we need to be thinking about and paying attention to as we are designing our policies and accommodations. So thank you for that. All right, Sarah, how about the grad student perspective?
Thank you so much, Marissa, Eva, Kaylee. Your perspective was, what I've seen. So as a grad student, I've been TAing remote, and also last quarter I TA'd in person. And what my own experience was, I felt like I was the first point of contact for my students. And as a TA, we're the ones who hear from them more often in discussion and office hours about their concerns, their situations. And it can be overwhelming at times with dealing with your own situation as a grad student and then also your students. And besides being overwhelming, it's difficult to navigate our students' concerns and absences while being flexible and adaptable, but also making sure we're following the syllabus and communicating with the professors. And for example, for my in-person discussion last quarter, it wasn't recorded. My discussions were not allowed to be recorded, even though we asked the professors. And I think that I felt very limited when my students could not make it to discussion. And I personally, what I did was I used my office hour time as discussion time because I wanted to be empathetic to my students who just could not make it during that time. They were feeling sick or whatever situation they were in. And I'm already, learning from my students that they're living with their roommates, families, or friends who are immunocompromised, and they're worried, or even they have family members who have COVID right now, and next week they have to come in. And that's kind of scary, and that causes stress and anxiety. And then last quarter, one of the biggest things for us as TAs was making sure students follow protocol, wearing their mask properly, and making sure if they have symptoms not to come in. And I kept reminding my students, like, if you have symptoms, don't come in, like, just communicate with me. But still, like, they would communicate with me, but they would be fearful, like, oh, my grade. And I think, like, for them, they felt that their grade was more important than their health. And I think that if we make that kind of environment where they feel like that, then they'll come in with symptoms. And so just as a TA, just want to reiterate, having the responsibility of our students can be stressful. And I think it would be nice if the professors kind of work with us and also ask us how we're doing, ask us what the students' concerns are, and meet with us every week to make sure that we are best able to support our students, because we are the ones at the front line hearing what they have to say. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for giving us a space to talk and allowing us to share our experiences.
And thank you, Sar, for really highlighting that point of the TA is really in the middle, right? You are the ones who are directly connecting with the students, and you're also the liaison to the professor. And so that does put an undue amount of burden and stress on you. And so I worry also about that role of feeling like you have to be the one to implement these policies. And so that is definitely a point at which we want to help you be able to address that with your faculty, so that they can take on more of that responsibility. Kate has a question in the chat, and also I just want to remind everybody in the audience to feel free to put questions in the chat as we were going through here. So Kate is asking, how do students feel about in-person discussion sections being recorded? Do students in the class feel like this invades their privacy or makes them less likely to engage? Would anyone like to respond to that? Kaylee?
Yeah, actually, I was in a situation where my in-person class, one of them was recorded and there was a participation element. I think that at the beginning, I was definitely quite shy about, I'm going to be on camera and if I ask my question. However, I think over time, I became more comfortable with the idea from the fact that this recording was only going to be made available to students in my class who were, a lot of them there in person hearing my question. And I felt more comfortable doing it that way than having no access to any form of recording after the fact. If the discussion sections, the engagement, I know a lot of courses, especially those that use LAs, they will have students work on an activity in groups together. And in those sections that I was in, what they would do is just stop the recording prior to the group work so that any student communications with other students would not be recorded. So if that's a concern, like I totally want to validate that concern. And the breakout rooms and something that really helped because those aren't recorded on Zoom. Yep. Or in person, like cutting the recording before the group work starts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Kaylee. Anybody else have anything to add?
Yes, just to add a really quick note, I agree with Kaylee. I had a professor who would record our office hours, and I feel like that's an even more intimate environment where you should feel open to share. And definitely in the beginning, I was a little apprehensive, and it did take some time to get used to, knowing that other people could watch what question I asked. But I found that actually became very comforting because I knew, number one, like I love recording. I knew, number one, if I forgot what they answered, if I wanted to revisit it, it would be available to me. And number two, I knew I didn't feel as much pressure to have to attend the office hours if I couldn't, because I knew that I would have that resource available to me. So it did get some time getting used to, but it definitely, I'm glad that it had happened.
Great. Is there anything that the instructor could do or say to help students feel more comfortable?
For me, it was like reaffirming that this is only going to be made available to the students in our class, and that like I physically, like, because I was concerned about like seeing my person on camera, and that was not going to be in the video. Like the way that they had the recording set up, it was just the professor and their response to my question. So I wasn't going to have to be like physically shown in the video. Yeah.
Great. We have time for maybe one more question, if anybody has any additional questions for our students. Okay. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming, for sharing your experiences. I know it can be hard for students to be in front of a whole bunch of faculty and intimidating, but you all are amazing and handled that beautifully, and gave us a lot of things to think about. So I really appreciate it, and saying thank you, a collective thank you from everyone for being here. Oh, and Rana, sorry, did you have your hand raised? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So last quarter, what I learned was there were some instances where students couldn't come to discussion. And what the TAs found out is their peers within their discussion learning group were either on a Zoom call or FaceTime call with them. But I don't know if that was something disruptive to the actual discussion activity, because it was like a group of 3 and they had one more person on a Zoom call or on a FaceTime call with them. And they had earbuds in, and the TA said it wasn't disruptive, but I was curious to see if the panelists could maybe share their thoughts on that.
Great.
Yeah, I saw that also happened in my class. So I gave that as an option, and the professors encouraged, like, if the students can't make it, they can join their group in the Zoom in person, so that they can work on the discussion activity together. And that seemed to work for the student. So I think that was an accommodation that they appreciated.
Thanks, Sarah. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
For my LAing class, when we had our meetings about content, my instructor he got a very high quality, I know this isn't like something everyone can do, but he got a very high quality camera with a very good microphone. So he just put that against the class, and I was often the person who was at home, and I would listen to it and kind of facilitate the discussion among the people who stayed at home. So I was like the one LA who was helping the people who stayed at home and was facilitating the Zoom activities at home. So maybe having like a group of the people who can't come on Zoom and maybe attending to that group on the computer versus having one person be virtual among people in person.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, we're going to talk more about kind of best tips on ways to do that effectively. So I appreciate your comments there. Okay, so I'm going to move us on, but feel free to continue asking questions in the chat, and our students, you're welcome to stay and respond if you'd like to. And so thank you again for being with us today. Okay, so a little comic relief here, and we just want to acknowledge that there have been a lot of messaging coming out from the university that can be sometimes hard to interpret. And so we found this meme that we thought maybe you would appreciate, about supporting both in-person and remote learning by splitting people in half. Of course, that's not an option, but we are now going to talk about actually realistic options for ways that we can approach this transition in the best way possible. So the first thing is the time-sensitive things that we think you need to do and think about immediately, and that would be to first decide when and if your class is going to return to in-person. So As we were told, we have some options. Option 1 is to return in person right on Monday, January 31st. Option 2 is to remain remote for either the next 2 weeks up until February 14th, or you can use that time if you don't want to do it consecutively throughout the rest of the quarter. And then option 3 is to actually make a request for an exception to stay online for the remainder of the quarter. So those are the 3 options. Most importantly, we want to emphasize that whatever you choose, that you communicate this to your students as soon as possible. You also will have, there is an ability to visit your classroom on this link, and then go to the classroom and figure out what technology you have in the classroom, and then go to the classroom and experiment and practice using that technology before you actually set up to be there in person with your class. There are microphones in some of the classrooms. We're going to go into this in more detail in a minute, but I just wanted to mention that urgently you want to make sure that you at least know what technology exists, and make a plan to actually go in and practice using it. And then the next most urgent thing is to check in with your TAs. As we just heard, there are some significant issues that they also are going to be dealing with, and so having that communication is really important. I'm going to hand this over to Katie to talk about checking in with your TAs.
As Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of extra emotional and physical labor that they'll be doing, trying to keep track of student attendance and making sure that everyone, is safe and healthy when they return to campus. So I would definitely take time to really listen to their concerns. I've had some TAs say they have young children at home. Traditionally, age graduate students may have young children as well that aren't able to be vaccinated. And so there's some concerns there too. I know there's limitations in what you can and can't do in terms of workload and what's available, but I think working together to figure out solutions would be ideal. We are hosting tomorrow through our CERTL program some sessions specifically for TAs to talk about what they are going through, as well as some resources and tips for them. So I'll share that link that you can, point to share that link that you can share with your TAs if they would be interested in joining us.
Unmute. Thank you so much, Katie. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight this one statement that came from our last message, which is that instructors should make every effort to accommodate students' reasonable health-related absences without undue penalty. And that's really what we are going to try and focus on, is how to do this effectively and successfully in a way that works for you. The point I want to make here is that there have been questions about this. What does it really mean? And it's really up to the individual faculty member to decide how to handle absences. And faculty members, instructors can decide to allow absences with or without official documentation. However, if there is a request for an accommodation that comes through CAE, then we are obligated to provide those accommodations. So that's the caveat to that. Otherwise, it's really up to you. And so, of course, we want to encourage and emphasize the importance of making these decisions with compassion, with empathy, with understanding where your students are coming from, as we just heard, how important that is. So basing these decisions on that, I think will help reassure your students, as well as have you be effective in being able to support them effectively. Okay, so let's go to some strategies here and thinking concretely about what you can do to create a plan for your course to pivot to in-person teaching. And so we have a document that we've put together for you. It's a Google Doc where you can actually write down some notes and think about, as we go through this, some steps that you want to take to create a plan for your course. And what we'd like you to do is link to this document and make a copy of it so that you have it for yourself. So the way that you do that is you click on the link, you'll find the document, click on File in the upper left-hand corner, and then drop down and click on Make a Copy. And that way you will have your own copy that you can fill in your notes and then later be able to share your ideas as we go along. And please let us know in the chat if anybody has any questions about how to do that or any difficulty doing that. Okay. Yeah. So having a plan in advance for student absences is what we're going to work on. And we're going to cover these 3 categories of where you want to think about doing that. The first being lectures, labs, discussion sections. Then think about what you're going to do in terms of low stakes assessments. And then in terms of high stakes assessments. So low stakes meaning those that are maybe more frequent, that have lower point value, that are more of your formative assessments with your students. High stakes being those summative assessments that are less frequent and that have much higher point value. And we're going to pause after each section for you to be able to take notes on your individual action plan. Okay, so the first question that came up when we asked you to RSVP that was highly, I think most people really wanted to learn more about this, had to do with the classroom technology and really the logistics of recording. And so Caroline Kong, instructional designer and technologist from the Center for the Advancement of Teaching, is here with us today, and she put together a terrific do-it-yourself guide for recording, and I've asked her to come and just spend a few words talking through the steps on how to do this, and then we have some ideas that we've shared and want to facilitate a discussion on that. So thank you, Caroline, for coming, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for being late. I probably have to turn off my video soon because I've been having internet connectivity issues. So I'm just going to wave hi with my video on. My name is Caroline Kong. I am from the Center for the Advancement of Teaching. I'm the instructional designer and technologist there. So the document that was shared in the chat is a DIY guide. If you find yourself in a classroom that doesn't have equipment that's available for you to be able to use to stream or record your classrooms, I first highly recommend going to our audio-visual sites. I'm going to try to avoid saying alphabet soup, but our audio-visual sites services site should have a classroom search that allows you to be able to go in and see what kind of equipment is readily available in your classrooms. Not all classrooms are going to have the same types of equipment, so I definitely recommend taking a look at that classroom search. And that classroom search is going to be, let me give you the direct link to the classroom search. There we go. The classroom search is really helpful to find that information. But yes, if you do find yourself in a classroom that doesn't have the equipment available to you, my recommendation is to bring a device that you're already comfortable and familiar using to service to help you do the recording. Any kind of recording is helpful for students, even if it means that you can only do an audio recording. If you could do a video recording, that's great too. This guide sort of walks through things that you're familiar with. So from the get-go, the device that you're familiar using, as well as using Zoom. Zoom, we've all learned with our year plus of remote teaching that it has a capability of doing the streams. It has the capability of doing the live recording too of your class and section. So however you want to configure yourself, definitely find equipment that's that you're comfortable and familiar with. And I also recommend doing sort of like a run through before course starts to make sure things are working as they're expected to be working. As I mentioned again, being able to have that tools that you're familiar with, being able to troubleshoot, you should be able to do all those things in these classrooms. They are fully equipped with Wi-Fi as well as a plug-in Ethernet port. Some rooms may vary, so checking out the classroom search guide will help you determine what you're going to be doing, and then sort of start small too. Try not to do everything all at once, but start with what works well. If you're just doing the audio recording, if you're just doing the video recording, start with that first. If you want to share a PowerPoint slide, you can start to move up to doing those things to increase it. The reason why I'm recommending Zoom is that not only can you do the recording, but Zoom also has the live transcript that is available to the students. So if you have students who are participating remotely who can't hear the audio that's coming through the sound, they can definitely take a look at the audio recording and the live transcripts. And if you do the recording, when you do a Zoom cloud recording, it will automatically send that media to Brew and Learn to CCLE, it makes it available for you to link up onto your course website. Once you've done the recording, if you do post it to your Brew and Learn or CCLE course, when you're posting it using the media tools, it will also include auto machine generated captions too. So a service you don't have to worry about, you don't have to enable or do anything, just making it available on your course website will give you that information, as well as like that added benefit to it too. This guide also includes, if you wanted to do things other than like just the recording, if you want to sort of facilitate like how you're going to be communicating in class, a plan to kind of walk you through those with mind that definitely have a backup. Backup is always a good way of having it too. But if you need to have that coordination with your teaching assistants, a learning assistant, or support staff, let them know ahead of time what you are planning to do and how they can help best support you. Let's see, we do have recommendation if you need voice amplification, because it is a requirement for us to be masked in classrooms. This amplification is a small little headset that the mic sits in front of your mouth, and then the speaker sits on your hips, or you can position it anywhere. It does get picked up in your Zoom recording. You do want to stand a little bit close, not too close, to have the audio feedback for it too. And I've mentioned it, just making sure if you have the means and you're able to do the recording. When you're recording class, even if you decide not to post it, just having the option if you need to fall back or be able to post those recordings is something that you definitely want to consider doing. And at least hearing from students, even having just an audio recording of the class lecture is very helpful for them. I don't know if there's, I don't want to go too much in depth with this because there's so much in the guide too, but yeah.
Great.
Recommendation is definitely take a look at the classroom search and then plan out what you will need, and then plan accordingly with the things that you're familiar with using.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And the guide that you put together is really incredibly helpful, and I think will be a great resource. Does anyone have any questions for Caroline?
Can I ask a question? This is Oliver.
Sure. Go ahead, Oliver.
So one thing that I've run into a problem with is when you're trying to use Zoom to share your screen, but you're also connected to a projector, that one group gets the slides as you meant them to see them, and the other group gets the presenter view. And I know there's a way to fix it, but I don't know how to do that. And it seems like it's always a hassle to do that. So is there an easy way to fix that?
Eric, is this in response?
Sure. I was going to make a comment too, but yeah, Oliver, what I did, so I did this last quarter. I recorded all the, we were in a room that we didn't have Bruincast, so we just did Zoom this way. And the way that I did it, and maybe this won't work for you, but I just figured out on my machine, when I hooked it up to the projector, which of the desktops that you can share through Zoom ended up being the one that was the the actual real display that I wanted to have of my actual slides, not the presenter display, and then just shared that desktop. So basically I knew which one it was, and I would just choose that one, and it would always work for me. So that's how we approach the problem. I don't know if that helps you, but that's what it worked for us reliably.
Anybody have any additional ideas for Oliver?
Yeah, another tip that I've seen is so definitely if you're familiar with setting up the desktops and understanding your computer layout, as Eric mentioned, some things that I've just done simply is replicate my computer screen. So I'm not having separate desktops or anything, rather that the screen that I'm looking at is actually the screen that students will also be looking at too. So you do want to sort of clean up your computer so that you only have the appropriate applications open, because this will mean that students can see exactly what you're seeing in real time.
Great, thank you.
And I'll just add a little really quick thing if I can, which is that having done this last quarter, every lecture, Zoom recording worked extremely well for us. It required a little bit of modification of one's approach. For instance, I'm normally a walker when I teach, and I didn't have one of those cool headset things. So I had to learn to just sit down in front of the thing while I was teaching, and it worked out. The students learn things. So that sort of thing. I think with small modifications, the cloud recording and sharing, but we were using CCLE last quarter, but sharing it works extremely well. That's a very easy thing to do. The closed captioning isn't the perfect, it isn't, but it helps students who need that accommodation. So I'm just going to rave about it a little bit and say that as an option, it's really not bad.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. There are some questions, some kind of technical questions in the chat. Caroline, I don't know if you have access to the chat. Oh yeah, there you are. Perfect. There was a question about public health classrooms not being on the list. My understanding is if your classroom is not on the list, you need to contact the IT people in that department or in that school, and they should be able to help answer those questions for you. Pros and cons to using the Zoom on the classroom computer versus your own computer. Caroline, does anyone have any opinions about that?
I do. As you're reading that question, I was typing out the response too. So some of the classroom computers already come with Zoom installed. So check out the classroom search guide. But I believe the instructions have you record all your recordings to the cloud. What happens is that when you sign into a classroom computer, it's sort of like this public computer, public domain. So you want to sign into the Zoom app. You want to do the recording to the cloud so that when you leave the classroom, when you log out of the machine, you don't have to worry about trying to retrieve that recording before another class comes in. It just goes straight to Zoom Cloud. If you've ever uploaded a piece of media to CCLA or to Brew and Learn, that automatically shows up in the My Media section in your Brew and Learn and your CCLA site. So you don't have to worry about that media. But it also exists when you log into your Zoom web portal. So when you log into ucla.zoom.us, you click on the recordings, you'll see the cloud recording that you created in your classroom. You have the option of sharing out the link or downloading it and posting it to your CCLA site or your Brew and Learn site.
Great. Thank you, Caroline. So I want to just get to this question or topic of high flex and what that means. And, there's lots of terms being thrown around. So I just want to get clarification on definitions and just have a brief conversation about this. And please continue to put your questions in the chat. So this idea of high flex means that you are teaching in person and that remote students can be also in the classroom at the same time using Zoom or some other conferencing technology. So the urge is to do this because it feels like the most equitable thing to do, right? You want to include everybody. You want to make sure your students at home are able to access the live classroom. The problem is that the technology to do it isn't quite there. And so it can be stressful and actually be inequitable if students don't have access to the same audio, if they can't hear, if they can't see, if they can't participate in the same way that the in-person students are participating. So, however, there are some things that you can do if you want to approach your class in this way that could make it work for you. We already heard a little bit of this from the students. One tip is to have a TA or an LA manage the chat where the students are on Zoom and listen in for what their questions are or their comments are. And so if you have someone really attending to them, then you can have that experience be more equitable with what's happening in the classroom. Groups of students, we talked about this a little bit, can Zoom together for group activities. That's another option. We're talking about that for the class that I'm teaching as well, either doing it synchronously or asynchronously, as long as you structure that pretty well. You don't have everyone in person on their own devices. So that is kind of a key thing. People think, well, everybody should bring their computers and everybody can be on Zoom at the same time. That leads to huge problems with audio because if one person unmutes, then you've got feedback and it becomes chaotic and you don't want to have that situation. It's going to be really hard to manage. Again, you want to make sure everyone at home can hear everything. You need to repeat things that students say in the classroom so that students online can hear it. Using Zoom captioning can help with that. So that is an option. It's imperfect, but it is an option. And then there are other tools that you can use like polling that work both for in-person and remote students. And I would just add to this that if you have a class where you are having guest speakers, for example, or you have a journal club where you're just really having people listen, those are great opportunities to do this type of, to take this type of approach, and actually can work quite well. So I think you have to analyze your situation, assess what you're trying to do, and then use these kind of guiding principles to help you make it as effective as possible. So I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And I haven't been paying attention to the chat, so my team can let me know if there's something to address.
I think there's just a little bit of catch up with some of the Zoom questions. So if anyone posted a question that hasn't been answered yet and they want to maybe wait another minute or two and then repost it, we can make sure that we don't miss any of the questions. And I see Margot has her hand up.
I missed the last thing on here because I was looking at the chat. Activities such as polling that work well for both in-person and remote. How do you do it so it works for both?
Yeah. So a polling feature like Mentimeter can be something that you have a link to so that both the students in the class can link to it on their phones, for example, as well as students at home can link to it on their computers. So that way they're all on the same, they're in the same poll and then can respond to that poll.
Okay. And if you use, there's like iClicker something cloud, I can't remember what it's called, that would work too?
Yeah, does anybody want to comment on iCloud? It's one of my experts in the room. I mean, on Clicker.
I can just say that the idea with iCloud is that you don't have to have the physical base. And I don't know if any of the instructors that have used it in a hybrid format want to jump in here. But I can put in the chat the contact for our iClicker rep, who is very responsive and able to meet with anybody that wants to get it set up on their computer. There is a cost for the students to use iClicker, but it is something that's used in a lot of classes. So the cost gets lower every time they're using it again. If they have a remote, it's a one-time cost. All right, Rana has her hand up. I'll let her share a little bit more. And I'm going to put the iClicker rep, Jenny Rivera, in the chat there.
I'm just going to share my experience with it. If you use iClicker Cloud, it enables students to respond via their own devices wherever they are. So you can set it up so that they're in a completely different state and they can still respond to your poll. They can use their phones, they can use their tablets, they can use their laptops. If you're going to use physical iClickers, you have to have a base. So that means you're going to have to connect the base physically to your device in the classroom. That means that, and then in the settings in iCloud, you can select to enable both mobile responses and physical iClicker responses. So you can actually give students the option, whether they have a physical device or a mobile device that they want, like if they are on the subscription. And then as long as you don't set up location services, it'll work. You basically will get responses anywhere they've got an internet connection, and it works great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rana. Is there someone else with a question?
I also just want to note real quick that in the chat we put an in-class polling guide that compares the different types of polling that you could do. So I would recommend checking that out, made by the wonderful Caroline Kahn.
Awesome. Okay. So, Ira, did you have a question or comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I was typing it in the chat, but I'll just ask it verbally. Do you think, is the problem with everyone having their own device and running Zoom simultaneously mainly just the feedback issue if somebody doesn't unmute, or are there also broadband limitations? I've got a 20 student class, a journal club class, that's entirely discussion, 2 to 3 hours of students just discussing. And it seems to me that it's going to be easier if we have students who can't make it to class to run it with everybody signed into their Zoom account at the same time. The alternative is that I just repeat what everybody says so that the students at home can hear. But if if we're going to be stressing the system by having everybody, signed into Zoom through the same classroom, then that's a problem.
I mean, my experience with running Zoom at the same time with a group of 5 people is that it's really hard. People accidentally put themselves off mute, and when you're in that small of a classroom, you're going to be next to your computer most likely. So those who are on Zoom and not in the classroom are going to be able to hear you and the other students in the room. So I don't know, Kim, did you have a solution or other idea?
It's a different topic.
Question. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts about this?
I would just comment on the Wi-Fi issue. I think that is room dependent. I've heard that some rooms have really bad Wi-Fi, others have stronger Wi-Fi, and it depends on the size of your class as well. A lot of this is going to be trial and error, although you're hearing from your peers some of the things that they really struggled with, and you might anticipate some of those challenges and try to prevent them with your students. So Ira, it sounds like you have a relatively small class. If the Wi-Fi is strong there, you might try it, but just anticipate there might be a lot of audio issues.
Okay.
Eric, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that I have not done this in a class, but this is how I run my lab meetings, right? Because it's a several hour long discussion, right? Well, depending on how excited people are, it goes for some amount of time. And the point is that having everyone log, like in Boyer Hall, we don't have enough Wi-Fi for that. I've tried it. UCLA's Wi-Fi is the worst of any university I've ever seen in my entire life. So it can be a little bit tricky for that. What worked for me kinda is to have a single Zoom and have whoever's presenting the slides basically be the instructor and have a mixed format, but it works very, it's not a great solution because people in the room can't hear the people on Zoom who are saying stuff and vice versa. It's very tricky. So if you're not in a room that has like real video conferencing capabilities, I think that can be actually kind of difficult. So you might try, if everyone can't log on because of Wi-Fi, you might try the kind of like having one Zoom computer where all the remote people are trying to participate with the in-person people. I don't know if that would work, but that might be the only option that we have in the current circumstances.
Okay, thanks.
Not sure if that's helpful, but
thanks to everyone. Yeah,
that's super helpful. Thank you. So I want to move us on to thinking about ideas for student absences from lectures, labs, and discussion sections. So these 2 questions are things we'd like you to think about and talk about. So the first question here is, how would students access materials from lecture, lab, or discussion section? And we're talking when they're remote, right? If they're absent. And so one option, as we've just talked about, is having lecture recordings and having transcripts. Another option might be have a collaborative note taking group, and so peers can have a shared Google Doc with volunteer note takers that rotate through each class meeting. And then the other, big question really has to do with labs and how to do online labs. And we do have a resource about that, so we can put that link in the chat. And then we'd like to hear from you what other ideas you have. And then the other question is also about how would students receive any participation points that they could have received during lecture, right? So how can they access material, but then how do they get participation points? So one idea might be to send their responses They have to send responses to the lecture slides that you give them, to questions that you add to that. And you could also change your attendance policy, right? So you could allow students, for example, to drop 10% of the attendance without having any questions asked for that. So take a minute, think about these two questions, and let's just open it up for any additional ideas that you might have. So is it, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Mayank? Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Nobody gets my name right, so it's all good.
Oh, well, how do you pronounce it?
No. Let's just, don't worry.
Okay. Do you want to ask your question? I think it's a really important question.
Yeah, actually, so as I mentioned that I hold very long office hours for 2.5 hours, and we generally chat about all kinds of things. So students feel that they have a community and they can talk. And in this, we talk science and we also talk general things about how they feel, what do they want. And some point that kept coming up many times is that students felt that they'll rather do the labs in person, because that's where they actually want to do the experiment. They need to learn that skill of how to use a pipette or use I don't know, oscilloscope or something. Whereas Blackboard instruction, they felt is something they can access from home because they can rewind the lecture and so on. So the question they had was, why is the whatever the option, the opposite, that labs automatically go remote potentially, whereas instruction for large classes must be in person. And I'm not able to answer their question in any reasonable way. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Does anybody have, we have a few people here that are very experienced in lab instruction. Gaston, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, sure. So we've been remote and for like 2 years now. And then last quarter, when it was semi-open, we stayed remote, but then we offered a pipetting lab, not graded. So we would run the remote offering of the lab as is. And then we had, I think, 150 students come in out of 800. And Rachel, Brittany, and I ran, and some TAs and some LAs came in, and we did like, I think, an hour pipetting and loading gels. And so basically we tried to give the students an hands-on experience, ungraded, and whoever would able to come was able to come. But then the actual lab was fully online. So then this quarter, so we just made an announcement that if we go back in person, we would go back starting in week 6. And then we queried all the students yesterday. And actually only like a third of the students are really interested in even coming back. Everybody else is too scared. So then I guess rather than flipping or offering both, I don't have enough stuff to really do both. And then also, gets into TAs and TAs getting sick. So it's hard to go back and forth. So I think we kind of decided for now to offer the online thing, and again, offer 2 labs where students can drop in. And then also, like technically, if we really would go back online in week 6, we would only have 3 labs, because the last lab is a video where the students present videos and stuff. So even if we go in person, there's only 3 labs left out of 10 to be in hands-on. So we will offer 2 different mini labs for students who want to come in. I mean, that's our plan right now. Where they do pipetting, loading a gel, run a PCR or something like that. And it's just basic, it's not graded, it's basically not part of the course, even though I don't know whether that makes sense. So students get the online experience, and we do cover PCR and all that online, but whoever wants to hold a pipette will be able to come in. And so we had a good experience with that last quarter. I don't know, Rachel, do you want to say something to that? Because Rachel is planning it.
Sure. I think I do think a lot of the students are also really curious about this because labs are one of the exceptions. And so it's like, well, labs can be online, and everyone says, well, why is that the case when labs should be in person? And I think what's the most challenging is that labs are incredibly hard to run as a hybrid, because how do you make it equitable between the students who are coming in person and doing hands-on activities and the students who are working remotely and are also doing things that are hands-on but are more data analysis or group work or things you can do via Zoom, which are not really the same activities you can do when you're physically in a lab with like a fume hood and a pipetter and all of those things. And we've done a lot of experimenting during the pandemic with simulations that sort of touch on our lab topics and meet the same learning goals, but we were never able to come up with just a straight like one-to-one. We're doing a beta galactosidase assay in the lab and then at home doing exactly the same thing, if that makes sense. It's always like the same learning goals, but different activities. So coming up with a way to make both of those things run simultaneously with only one set of TAs is essentially like running two courses and then trying to figure out how students go back and forth between them on weeks when they're sick and they can't come to the physical class and those types of things. So logistically, it's very challenging to come up with a simultaneous lab, at least for us. We've struggled with it.
Thank you both. I mean, you're coming up with some creative ideas and ways to really help meet the needs of all the students. So I think it's pretty admirable what you're doing. Tina, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you. I have a little bit of experience in that area, not at UCLA, at Caltech, when the beginning of the pandemic hit and I was teaching a lab course online. We thought of doing this several ways. One was to ship students pipettes and equipment and lab material. So they were doing it out of their garage. They had lab coats on, doing everything over Zoom, and we couldn't really ship them anything that would be potentially hazardous or dangerous. So another thing we ran into, and I was just to add on to what Gaston and Rachel was saying, is to have someone else, I think, do it in the lab. So we had a postdoc in the lab to perform these in the lab for those students who obviously couldn't make it, and then ask them, okay, what do you think the next step would be? Do we add this? Do we move this? So that was really just to make it more equitable for everybody. But ultimately, we couldn't, show them like the correct way to pipette necessarily by like looking at their Zoom, because we didn't want them to bring that too close to their camera and drip anything. So I just wanted to add to what you guys were saying, that I agree it's difficult, and those were the different ways we experimented. We also used lab archives. I didn't see that list on the list of the Excel sheet that was sent out, but there's several companies popping up right now during the pandemic trying to offer those assistance. That's all.
Great. Thank you, Tina. We're going to put a document, a shared spreadsheet in the chat that will enable you to put your contact information and ask any questions of any of the experts in the room, so that you can continue to talk about any one of these topics. But we want to give you a chance we want to cover a couple of different categories, so I want to make sure we get to them. And first, what I want to give you some time for, just a minute or two, to write down some ideas on your action plan for students that may miss some of your lectures or your labs or your discussion sections. So go ahead and take a minute to do that. All right. So we want to move on to the next category for us to discuss, and that is about how to plan for students who miss these low stakes quizzes or assignments in your class, the formative assessments. So really thinking about what your policy will be for extensions on homework assignments due to an illness that is easy for you to manage for both you and your students. One example could be allowing your students to drop 10 to 20% of the lowest assignment grades. And then another thing to consider is if you do have in-class quizzes, how can they make that up, right? So you could allow students to drop those 10 to 20% of quizzes to save time in dealing with having a lot of makeups. You can also use the Bruin Learns, the online option for all of your quizzes instead of the in-class quizzes. So those are just a couple of examples. And so I just want to open this up and ask if anyone has any other ideas of things that they're doing. And thank you, Point shared in the chat that there is going to be a training on how to use Bruin Learn to create quizzes. So we won't get into the technical aspects of that at this point. Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, we just do the in-class quizzes with an online component. So we just do the same quiz online and then have the quizzes in class. And I think it's gonna work out just fine. They're pretty simple multiple choice type things, and Canvas is really good about that. So
great.
Pretty straightforward for us.
Thanks, easy peasy. Any other ideas or thoughts? Eric?
Yeah, I hate to keep talking all the time, but everyone who knows me knows that I do that. So I'll just share my experience with having done this even last year when we were online and last quarter when we were hybrid. All participation that we had in all low stakes assessments, we offered an alternative way to get them online, and that worked extremely well for us. I mean, basically just what Dan says, offering things like quizzes or any kind of thing online, it just was seamless and allowed students, because I think that Kaylee's point here was really great. I don't know how many of us, when we were undergrads, we went to school when we were sick. I did all the time, right? But now it's a different thing. And generating a class structure that forces students to lie on their like past thing, their daily symptom monitoring survey. I think if you've got a class structure that is forcing students to lie, you have to think about what that means for your class, right? Like, is that the right thing to do? And so, maybe under normal circumstances, encouraging students to participate in class when they're sick makes sense. I don't know, but for now, that to me, so I think it's really, really straightforward to give students an option to do something when they can't make it. And it's not their fault, because they have to do the symptom survey. And if they fail it or not do it, I mean, it's not their fault at all. I mean, this is the university policy. So I think that being as flexible as possible with this, it's not that much extra work, and it's really the right way to go. So that's my perspective.
And I think you have a lot of support for that perspective, Eric. So thank you for sharing that. Kim is asking, can you give an example of an assessment options or alternatives?
I mean, I'm happy to give one if that's helpful. There are probably people who do a better job of it than me, but the way that we would do it is the following. So in our classes, we have a lot of clickers and a lot of group stuff that we're doing. And so what we would do was essentially, if a student was not present and thus couldn't click in, they weren't even showing remotely, they were just not able to be there because they were too sick. What we would do is we would have just a separate thing on the LMS, which was essentially covering the same topics, the same kinds of questions that they did online, and they got credit for it. Usually what we would do is to try to encourage participation through Zoom, make it a little bit more annoying than being in class. So students would feel like, oh, there's a benefit to actually, showing up remotely. but it wasn't that much different. So essentially what we're doing is just making an online quiz in Canvas that covered the same stuff we were doing in lecture. That probably won't work for everyone. That worked for us for our lower stakes in-class assessments. So I don't know if that's a helpful example, but that's what we did.
Super helpful. And I think I just want to emphasize the point that we've already made, but reiterate it, that figuring out what works best for you and your class is going to be part of this process. So be gentle with yourselves and be flexible and try things and know that you don't have to do everything. Rana. Dan, did you have your hand up for, is that an old hand? Or a new hand?
I am an old hand. So.
I didn't say that.
No, that's left over from before, but I did, well, since I have the microphone, I did want to ask the group about, I'm really worried about, we have only 2 dates on which the students actually have to show up, and that's second midterm, which is in about 3 weeks, and the final exam. And I'm really worried about those things. And if you have ideas about that, I'd be happy to hear them.
We're going to go to high stakes assessments next. So hold that question and we'll get to it. Rana, did you want to make a comment?
I just wanted to make a quick comment. It kind of piggybacks off of Eric's idea of having an alternate assignment, which is just something that you make available. Because the other thing you have to consider is even if your students are in the classroom, sometimes technology doesn't collaborate. So you want to have a technologically equitable alternate assignment too. So we use iClickers, which are just multiple choice questions. We post them and their answers at the end of class. What we've asked students to do is to provide the reasoning for the incorrect answers. Now, let's say you don't have iClicker questions already embedded within your course and you have anything related to that, but you can easily just ask students to reflect on whatever content you've covered in your class and write you 1 paragraph about how this applies to their real life. Doesn't require you to come up with something every week, but it's the same assignment for the entire rest of the quarter. So, and it's an alternate and it works great.
That's a great idea, Rana. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I just want to remind everybody about this Brew and Learn training, which is Thursday from 1 to 2 if you want more training on how to use Brew and Learn to create your assessments. So there is that. And then I want to give you a minute now to just jot down some ideas on your action plan of how you're going to manage students who miss these low stake assignments or quizzes. So I'll give you a minute to do that. All right. So the last category here we want to talk about is how to plan for students who may miss these high stake exams, as Dan was mentioning. So the midterm, the final. And I just want to provide some context here. There may be multiple reasons, right, why students can't take an in-class exam. Some might be unable to come to class because of the COVID safety reasons. But they can still take the exam remotely, right? Others may be really sick, right, and not able to take the exam. So those are 2 different scenarios that you may or may not want to treat differently. So if you have in-class high-stake exams, how can they make that up, right, if they miss it? So one option might be to continue just offering your exams remotely, right, and then don't even bother with the in-person exam, but do it remote. Another thing to address would be, what is your policy for makeup exams if they can't take them at all because they're ill? So boldly, you could just not have exams. I mean, that is an option. We have to say it. It is an option, right? You could have them, you could assess their learning summatively with other ways of doing that. For example, using group projects or just individual projects. You could also pick a backup exam date in advance so they know that there is that option. Any other ideas? So let's just throw this out there and let's have a discussion about this. What other ideas do you have for how to manage this? And we do have a link in the chat for all kinds of alternative assessments that you can use. Okay, I'm going to throw this question back to Dan. Dan, do you feel like you have some solutions here, or there are more? What are you thinking about?
Well, I don't. Historically, at least, and last year we had this class remote, and so we did the exams remote. There was the assessment was not good. The cheating was rampant. And that was just the way it went, and it was pretty unsatisfying. I'd be okay with, if we're going to keep these exams remote, then the whole class might as well be remote in many ways, and that would be equitable, certainly. But I don't teach by myself. I teach with other people, and certainly the viewpoint is that if people aren't going to be able to come to take the second midterm and the final, they should drop the class now. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but it allows a more comprehensive assessment of learning in the class, and that's where I feel kind of stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a dilemma. I'm just wondering, others, faculty out there that have been thinking about this, I know a lot, how to manage summative assessments equitably, how to deter or help support academic integrity. Anybody have any thoughts? Rana, do you want to share your comment in the chat?
So let me just start by saying I have not tried this out, okay? But I've been thinking a lot about this, and the way to distinguish between a novice and an expert is based off of how well they understand the topic to be able to write a good question. And so what if you enable groups of students to write up a question? And for our course, they're actually pretty challenging questions. They have multiple parts, and they explain like an overall big picture. Like, let's say it's the hypothalamic pituitary axis and hormonal regulation, right? So give them the opportunity as part of a group project. Make this like a small stakes assignment. Let them write the question, let them write the answer, submit that to you. You can then reframe. You've got 6 groups, you've got now 6 questions. You can reframe them, modify them, adjust them in some way, and then make that the assessment that you post online. At least each group will know at least one question within the set of the exam, or at least be familiar with the framework of it. And you might think that this is like not necessarily, like it might be easy. You might be thinking, well, that's easy. Anyone can write an exam question. But if you give them a blueprint of exactly what that question needs or requires, like learning objectives, if you will, to be addressed, they will really struggle with this. It comes really easy to us, but it's not something they're familiar with, and they're going to struggle with it. And especially if you put them in a group, that's going to actually give them a better chance of, that's where all the learning will happen. rather than just sitting down and taking a test. I don't know. This is my own opinion. I have yet to try this, but it's one of those things that I keep thinking in my head is a great way to really enable students to become really self-sufficient learners and empower them to take advantage of these opportunities where things are changing, to learn new skills. I mean, why not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and now might be a good time to experiment with some new way of assessing your students. So thank you for that, Rana. Okay, so I know we only have a few more minutes left here. I do want to give you a chance to, well, first write down your ideas in your action plan for how you plan to plan for students who miss their high stakes exams. So give you a minute to do that. And then we also just wanted to address this question of how to involve students and TAs and LAs in making and implementing the plan. So there was already a discussion in the chat, I believe, about surveying students, and we have a template for you to be able to do that, to really understand where your students are at, what they're struggling with, what they may need in terms of accommodations. Make sure you're discussing plans during a meeting with the teaching team. So make sure everybody is on the same page and you know what your plan is and you've discussed it with your TAs. And then maybe even asking student volunteers for some or part of the plan. So that would be like part of the collaborative note taking, and kind of also gets to what Rana was saying about really having students be empowered to take responsibility for their own learning, right? So that's another way to do that. I want to move to the next slide and really remind everybody that the communication piece of this is super important. One of the things we've heard from students is that every faculty has different ways of doing things. The Brew and Learn websites all look different. It makes it very confusing. Now we have another transition. So really clearly communicating whatever it is that you decide, whatever your plan is, with your students, and making sure that you're putting it in the context of understanding that we are all kind of experiencing this collective trauma and that all of us are still coping with it in different and varying ways and have had different impacts on each of us, right? And then again, really using this as an opportunity to communicate your care, your support, your respect, and how much you really want to be inclusive and do the best to be inclusive for all your students. Making sure that you're providing the information that they need in very clear, plain language, removing jargon. And then, you can do that, and we have an example here that you can look at, but you can communicate this on your Brew and Learn site, both in the announcements section. So that's where they're going to get an email, and that announcement will stay there, so they'll be able to see it. And so they'll be aware of any updates that you've made to your policies, in addition to putting it in your syllabus. You can also put it in the top as a top module when they go to look at their modules on Brew and Learn, so that they see that right away on your Canvas page. And that way they can link to any updates that you have or any additional links that you want to share with them. So we know folks are getting ready to go, and so we do have a form. We'd love to hear your feedback. if you do have to leave. But I just want to say in this last couple minutes that we know this is feeling really overwhelming and stressful, and we want to just make sure you know that there are lots of people here to support you, including not just us, but the people in this room. And so really use that collaborative document that we shared with you to help get your questions answered, either from us or from others. And then we do have resources, right? So we have our website that you can refer to. We have the resources from our last forum that includes slides and a recording, as well as from today. And then we also have lots of upcoming events that we'll be sharing with you about ways that you can engage with us around teaching and learning. And other than that, I just want to say thank you. I want to wish you the best of luck, and just remind you that you're not alone, and let us know if there's any other way that we can support you. And we'll hang out now for a couple minutes for anyone who has any questions they have for us. So thanks for coming today.